we are live with episode 42 of the Wake Up podcast. And I have a very, very special guest on the show with me. Someone who I've, I've known of his work for so many years. And when I saw a tweet a couple of weeks ago, I was like, I have to get Edward on the show. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Edward Griffin, the author of The Creature from Jekyll Island, and the founder of the Red Pill University and the Red Pill Expo, which he's going to tell us more about later. Ed, thank you for coming on.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
Absolutely, absolutely, my friend. We will get stuck straight into these questions, and we want to make the most of this session to elucidate not only what the creature from Jekyll Island is, but how we can come together to hopefully destroy, for lack of a better term, this creature. So, without further ado, my first question that I'd like to kick into is, could you talk to what the initial objective was, in broad terms, of the Jekyll Island meeting? Just for people who may not have read the book, and who don't even know what the hell we're talking about with Jekyll Island.
I think it's pretty clear what the original objectives were. The banking fraternity, for lack of a better phrase today, that seems like the right word. The banking fraternity or industry back in the early 1900s was not as dominant in America as it was in Europe. Under, the Bank of England was, of course, perhaps the granddaddy of them all, the first central bank of the world, meaning it was the first bank that officially was given the authority to control and manipulate the nation's money supply. Prior to this period of history, the countries themselves, the nations, were sovereign in the sense that they issued their own money. And many people still think that we issue our own money today, like America has its own money. In America, the United States of America issues its money. It doesn't. The banks issue it now. And so at that particular time in history when the Federal Reserve System was created, it was, in my understanding of this, an attempt to bring the United States into the same kind of subservient relationship to the financial industry, the banks, as they had enjoyed in Europe and other parts of the world, because our banks were pretty much independent. And any deals or contracts or special privileges that banks were so accustomed to receiving were all being administered at the state level prior to this period. So yeah, the bankers and the state governments were pretty much in the same relationship as Europe, but not as in terms of a whole country. So the whole motive of this meeting was to bring that change about. Now, I don't want to get too deep into this because it'll bore everybody perhaps, but to me it's fascinating history. And that is that the banks in America did have strong influence over the credit of the country, and a lot of the banks were going bankrupt because they were making promises to safeguard their depositors' money when in fact they were lending the money out and not really telling the depositors that. They told the depositors that, hey, your money here is anytime you want it, but in fact only a little piece of it was there. Most of it was loaned out for interest. And so there were a lot of bank failures, and people were losing their deposits galore. And so there was a hue and cry for banking reform in America. They wanted the government to step in and take control of these banks to protect the people. So now basically what happened is that the banks themselves are not dummies. The heads of these banks are not dummies. And they basically said something like this. They said, all right, guys, the people of America want banking reform, and of course whatever the people want, that's what they get. The congressmen are all over it now. They're all talking about banking reform because it gets them elected. So let's give them banking reform. Let's not just wait around for them to come up with a piece of legislation. Let us write the legislation, and we'll call it banking reform, when in fact it was banking conquest, but we'll sell it as reform, and nobody will know we wrote the bill. And that was the reason for that meeting on Jekyll Island. This was a group of bankers that wanted to get away from public scrutiny. They certainly didn't want to go to Washington, D.C. They didn't want any questions asked, and they went on a private railroad car for a trip that was 2 nights and a day from New Jersey up to Georgia, up to the inland straits there in Georgia. Brunswick is where they got off the train there. And then they spent a whole week on Jekyll Island, which was privately owned in those days by these same bankers and their associates. All the super wealthy from New York owned that island, and they had magnificent mansions there. But they went there because there was a big clubhouse that they'd built, the Jekyll Island Club, it was called. And that's where they spent the next week, hammering out all the details of this piece of legislation that was eventually going to be offered as a means of controlling the banks. And so what they really wanted to do initially, I think, is to get this monkey off their back of the public demand for banking reform and to convert that into actually another lever over the economy and over the people themselves. So that was the first step. The next step is more what I was talking about initially, and that is to give the banks more power to control the supply of money and credit, more power than they had before. And so that was the second objective. And then lurking way there in the background was a third objective that didn't really come to light until another decade or two. But it was already in the minds of some of those founders like J.P. Morgan. And the shadow figure behind all of them was Colonel Edward Mandell House, who had opened up shop in the White House, by the way. He became Woodrow Wilson's alter ego. Wilson didn't do anything without consulting with Edward Mandell House. Woodrow Wilson even said, whatever Colonel House believes, I believe. Something even stronger than that. And so
classic puppet.
Yeah, classic puppet. And of course, as far as Edward Mandell House was concerned, and Pierpont Morgan and a couple of the others in that early stage, they already were dreaming ahead of a new world order, a world government and a world banking consortium, rather than just in every little country having banks that were beholden or controlling, I should say, the national governments. They were looking ahead to controlling the international government. And of course, first they had to build the international government before they could control it. So that was the third motive as I see it. And I studied a lot of these documents and personal memoirs of these people. And it was pretty clear to me that that was a threefold dream that they had. One was a necessity and two were dreams. And now they've all come to fruition, of course.
Very much so. I think, thank you for that explanation. For me, having read this and sort of having done my research around this, like reading Rothbard and things like that, you realize that that they used that opportunity of, I guess, disgruntlement by the public as a guise for the formation effectively of a cartel, giving them a monopoly on the production of money, which I think a lot of people, and I love in your book how you actually went and took an entire chapter to actually describe and discuss what money is. There was a few parts in that I'd like to pull some threads on, because I don't believe I don't think anything has intrinsic value. I think I subscribe to the subjective theory of valuation, under the Austrian school of economics, I guess. But in any case, when any institution, organization, or individual has the capacity to issue what is supposed to measure the product of our labor, and the product of our labor is supposed to measure our time and energy, the two things that cannot be created or destroyed, you have the ultimate power, which is exactly, what the motive for this so-called meeting at Jekyll Island was. And that sort of feeds into, prior to the creation of the Federal Reserve, you had, I know there was in your book, you called it the diffusion of banking power prior to the Federal Reserve. And, I just, many people pointed to the banks in a localized fashion, creating what you mentioned before, this fractionalized version of money, which led to bankruptcies. But the damage was localized if it was, a fragmented banking system. Whereas with the creation of the Federal Reserve, instead of the damage of banking shenanigans being localized, it turned into this what you call the game of bailout, where doesn't matter what the losses are, doesn't matter what the decision is, everything's socialized. So we end up playing a game of heads, the bank wins, tails, everyone else loses. So it's like it's an unwinnable game.
Mm-hmm.
So could you talk to that a little bit, sort of the game of bailout, shifting losses to the taxpayers, and sort of, why that's such a cancerous manifestation of power in a society?
Well, yes, you've touched on a lot of really interesting and deep topics, each one in themselves. I hope I can remember a couple of them. First, I recall you mentioned something about the intrinsic or so-called intrinsic value of money as a measure of value or measure of labor, comparative labor. And that gets to be pretty theoretical at times, but still, when the day is over, and history proves this, that as long as people have freedom to choose what to use as barter and what to exchange as a representation of value, inevitably at the end of that cycle, whatever it is, something will rise to the top that is almost universally agreed upon as having a value. Now, you can call that intrinsic value or some other word, but you're right. What is intrinsic value? That's only in the eyes of the beholder, in a way. If it may have intrinsic value to one person and not to another person, so it's not universally intrinsic. But in a society or in a culture, there is a consensus that arises after a long period of time that this is it. And whether it's cows or jars of wheat, or ounces of gold or silver, or Disneyland tickets, or whatever it is, whatever people voluntarily accept almost universally is usually a pretty good money because of that universal acknowledgement of value. And of course, the value arises from being able to accept something for which you have absolutely no use at all, and to keep it in your pocket or in your vault. And then when you find something that you do have use for, you can take this thing and then you can swap it for that. So the definition of money is a medium of exchange. And I think it's important to know that we're talking now about a medium of exchange. That's all it is. And that medium of exchange has more lasting value, more universally accepted, if it also has some value other than being a medium of exchange. We may come back to that later because I understand we're going to be talking about cryptos, perhaps. It's a very interesting study because here is a new concept where there is no value other than a medium of exchange, which raises some very interesting questions. So anyway, I just wanted to clarify that there is a kind of a philosophical debate as to whether or not anything has intrinsic value, and I just wanted to weigh in on it and say, not universally, no, but as close as you can come to it, the better off. The closer you come to it, the better off you are. So now, how does that play out in our lives? And we, I want to speak for myself now. I was born into a system where I didn't even understand money. All I knew was that if I had a couple of pennies in my pocket, in those days, you could go down to a candy store near the school, and for 1 penny, you could get a stick of licorice, and that's why those songs were of the period, penny candy. It was a real thing, and you could get quite a good long stick of licorice for a penny, and for 2 cents, oh boy, you're really rolling. So what made those 2 cents so valuable? Well, and then who issued those? It's a long history, and that's why I wrote the book. But the end of that story is that our money in those days did have intrinsic value in that sense that I was talking about, because the copper in that penny could be melted down and sold to a copper wire company that was going to make wire out of it, and so it had that value. So if you had copper in your pocket, or silver, or nickel, or any of these metals, they all had value for something other than money. And that's why they were good for money. So now the banks come along and they say, well, we're going to get rid of all of these things that have intrinsic or alternative value, and we're just going to declare what the value is. We're going to put numbers on a piece of paper and all of that, and we're not going to allow anybody to exchange those pieces of paper for an ounce of gold or silver, because that's passé. Who cares about gold and silver? It's an evil thing. They put up the big propaganda show on how evil gold and silver was, and how the wealthy people that had all the gold and silver were very grumpy and very mean and very selfish and so forth. And it was kind of a war on the idea of money having this universal value to it. So naturally we fell for it, because these same people captured our school systems, and we were taught, as I was taught when I went to school, that all of the things I just mentioned, I was taught the basis of collectivism and how the state was really the ultimate arbiter of all good things. And as long as we had the ability to go to the polls and vote for somebody, well, then obviously those people we voted for would be honest, and they would be fair, and they'd be very wise, and they would look out for us. And so we didn't have to question them or look out for them. They would look out for us, and everything would be fine. If they wanted to create money, it must be a good idea. And whatever kind of money they wanted to create, it must be a good idea, because it's too complicated for the average person to understand. So once we departed from that rather primitive understanding of money having to be good for something other than a medium of exchange, which is what makes it good as a medium of exchange. Once we got into the theoretical concept, well, money can be whatever the wise people declare it to be, and that way we can have credit, and it'll be wonderful for everybody. Once we took that step, we started down the slippery slope to the point where money would become a political tool, and it would be perhaps the most powerful weapon of unscrupulous men who went into political careers, and they could use that against the people, because for one thing, they can create money literally out of nothing, as you well know, or even worse, not only out of nothing, they can create it out of debt. If they could create it out of nothing, that would be bad enough. But knowing that the money they create has to be paid back, well, that's a no whole new dimension, and it's paid back to people who didn't have it in the first place. And it's an interesting mind game, and it open. What I'm leading toward is that this mind game that money has become opens up cracks and crevices in the system where unscrupulous people can manipulate the heck out of it, and the Joe Blow on the street has no idea what's hitting him. All he knows is that he got a nice pay raise this year, and he had a nice, like a 6% pay raise. That is good. But the purchasing power of those dollars went down 12%. In other words, he buys less. He got a pay raise, but he buys less. And at the end of his life of 40 years of productive work and saving and all of that, and all of his money that he saved, doesn't buy anything. And how did this happen? It must be something, God doesn't like us or something, Nobody understands
money. Or it's those
money.
evil capitalists raising their prices.
That's much better. Yeah. That's much better, because if you can say it's those evil capitalists, that means you're saying, therefore, tear down their system and give all those levers of power to me.
I can do it better. Socialism wasn't done last time. I can do it better.
Give it to me, and we will do it. And that's how history goes, from one tyrant to another, primarily because they put all the blame on the tyrant rather than on the system. Well, back to the system in this case is fractional reserve money and fractional banking. So I don't know if I talked around that topic. Is there some specific element that you'd like further comment on?
No. I want to dig into this a little bit more, but just a little bit later on, because I want to build like a bedrock towards this. I think what you just mentioned there, though, is you reminded me of a thing that I always say when I give talks about Bitcoin and the history of money and things like that. And what I say to people is, if the train is on a set of tracks and the track is going off the cliff, it doesn't matter if you change the driver of the train. The train's still going off the damn, it's going off the cliff. You need to change, you need to get off the train, and you need to relay the track somewhere else. And the problem we're living in the world today is that it doesn't matter whether it's Trump or this or that, or like all of this stuff. It's all just, we're just swapping the train driver. The system needs to change. We have to remove the monopoly of money
Mm-hmm.
out of any issuer's hands.
Mm-hmm.
Money has to be organic. So
Yes,
long
yeah.
as money can be issued by an individual or an institution, we're just going to run the same race. We're just going to keep driving straight off the cliff and changing the driver of the train like we think we're doing something different or novel. It's
Yes,
madness.
you're totally right on that. However, an institution or an individual can issue money. I have no problem with that. But the problem arises when they also issue laws that force us to accept it. Now, there is a real problem. I think a versatile money supply where we have our choice of money. We could choose between um, silver or gold or Disneyland tickets, as I like to say. What if somebody came up with a new kind of money that would be swapped for well, we almost had that at one time. I remember back in, I think it was the 70s, we had blue chip stamps and green stamps. In every store you went into, if you made a purchase, anything over $1, you'd get a couple of stamps. And if you had a big purchase, you get half a book full of stamps, and you stick them into the book. First thing you know, the book is, full. You take it in, and you can go to almost any store and say, how many green stamps do you need for this rocking chair? And it was actually a kind of a developing money. I have no problem if somebody wants to, if the banks want to issue fiat money, worthless money. Uh, Now, if it's a very honorable, reputable bank that for 120 years has always kept its promises, has never defaulted, then somebody might want to venture forth and say, I'll use that money. It's been around for a long time. It hasn't hurt anybody. They've always kept their promises. It hasn't lost its purchasing power. And but probably that person, even though he's willing to use the bank's money, the bank note, he probably would discount that compared to ounces of silver or gold, because that never loses its value. It's not. There's no third party in there. There's nobody that you have to depend on. It's what it is, and people want it for itself. And so that the bank's money undoubtedly would be discounted, maybe 20% or 15% over the same item being purchased with gold or silver ounces. So I like the idea of freedom of choice. I wouldn't outlaw any kind of money, but I would expect people to keep their contracts and keep their promises, and that the law should enforce that.
I think you touched on a really interesting point there, is this idea of a promise. When money is uh, when money's I guess value, and I don't want to use the word value too lightly, but when the perceived value of a money is
Well,
based on a promise,
they call
it
that
is always
demand.
dependent.
Yeah, typically they call that demand, you know, because
Yeah.
that's the,
So
yeah.
when you've got that, it's when it's based on the promise of an issuer, the discount rate is always how strong is the promise of the issuer. And like you
Mhm.
just said, the fact that you've got gold and silver are a good example of something where you don't need the promise of an issuer,
Mhm.
because they are a physical object, which is, verifiable at the individual level. And this is where, and again, we keep sort of coming back to this, which I want to go into later, but Bitcoin is something that is chosen at the edge. So there's two things probably there that you mentioned, is the idea of a promise, and if something can be easily verifiable where you don't need a promise, it has the ingredients to be a better form of money, because it is able to be selected voluntarily by the user of the said money. And that actually proves what's stronger money. Like if something is selected organically by the market versus being imposed by fiat, by decree, you have organic money versus fiat money.
Well,
And
of
so,
course,
so
and
I
I think
think
that I think that point is very has a hidden value to it, and that is that if you have good money, you don't have to have a law to
have to
force people to.
exactly.
They'll be climbing over each other to get it. Yeah.
Exactly,
Whenever you see
exactly.
that a money is backed by a law, you know there's
Mm-hmm.
something wrong with it.
100%, hundred
Mhm.
percent. So I think that's one of the most important pieces. So I guess I do want to go into a discussion about this, in the context of Bitcoin. But let's sort of go back to the talk to me a little bit about the bailout game, so that people sort of understand that, and and how it relates to shifting losses to taxpayers, which I've written here in brackets is the definition of socialism. Let's talk a little bit about that, and then I want to go into later the Fabians and some of the crazy stuff that happened there.
Okay, well, let me see if I can simplify this. Every time I plow through this kind of material, it seems like I come in from a different compass point. But today, how do I feel like approaching it? Okay, well, let's start with the banks themselves. The banks, we know that they are very profitable, but a lot of people haven't thought through as to what the business of the banks really is. Well, the business of the banks, of course, is to make money, but you can make money in a couple of different ways. We may come back to that, but it makes money in the sense that you and I make money, to earn it, in other words, not just to manufacture it, but to make money in the sense of earning it for a service of some kind. And so how do they do that? Well, that's simple. They earn interest on loans. So now, if you were in any kind of a business that made money on some kind of a transaction, you'd want to be able to have a lot of transactions. If you were an automobile manufacturer and you made money on the sale of the cars you manufacture, you would have dreams of having a huge plant that could produce tens of thousands of cars a day, if not a minute. The higher the better, because the more cars you manufacture and sell, well, the more money you make, the more profit you make. Now, the banks have a similar situation. They're renting money, and they cannot make a profit on it unless they have something to rent. So the money supply in the bank is critical to them. If the bank doesn't have much money in it, very few depositors, that's the only reason banks want depositors, is because that means they can loan more money and therefore make more profit on the loans. If the bank doesn't have much money to loan, it's going to starve. It's not making any money. So it's always looking for people to borrow, and borrow. So people forget that the banks will die if people don't borrow money. They die. They need that in their blood. That is their blood, as a matter of fact. So now, once you get that in your mind and you put yourself in the position of a banker, you're totally concerned all day long. How can I increase the loans? How can I not only increase the interest rate, which is one thing, but how can I increase the number of loans, the volume of loans, the amount of money that's being loaned out? And these dumb people won't come in and put their money into my bank, so I can't loan it out. I've got to figure out a way to loan out money that I don't have. And that's where we get to fractional reserve banking and all of that. But now, okay, so now you begin to understand a little bit the banker's dilemma, I would call it, is that they've got to get the customers to borrow money from them in great quantities. All right. Well, who are the biggest borrowers? Governments are the biggest borrowers, and the large corporations are the biggest borrowers. Banks, man, that's their heyday when they've got a loan contract with General Motors or Microsoft or with Mexico, or these are big borrowers, and you don't have to have a lot of those loans before you're living on easy street with profit on your interest on your loans. But now what happens when these people have borrowed, or these governments and institutions have borrowed more money than they can pay back, and they start to renege on their loans? Now the bankers are really in trouble, because this is worse than never having made the loan in the first place. Because now they have the liability on their books of the loaned out money. Well, that's both a liability and an asset. But nevertheless, if the asset doesn't pay off and return the money, then the liability remains, and they have to write that off of their books as a loss. And boy, now a couple of those, and those banks are bankrupt. So they have to keep their lenders in a state of economic health, so to speak, so they can continue to pay interest on the loans. So now we come to your question. What is this thing about bailout? Well, all of a sudden, the governments are needing money. They can't function anymore. They're in debt, and the corporations and their friendly governments are all saying, "Hey, we need money. We can't borrow any more money from the banks because we already owe them more than we can afford, and they're not going to loan us any more money. We need money. We need to borrow some more loans." So the government steps in, right? The government steps in and says, "Well, we've got to save the world. We've got to save these friends of ours. We can't let those corporations go out of business." Heavens, if General Motors went out of business, how many tens or hundreds of thousands of people would be put out of work? That many thousands of families would no longer have an income. They wouldn't be able to eat. Their children wouldn't have milk. They would die of malnutrition. There probably would be suicides. Oh, we can't let that happen because we're a responsible government. And so all the while, using the pretense of helping the common man, what they're really doing is they're voting taxpayer dollars to make emergency loans or grants. In many cases, they're outright grants. They appear to be loans, but they're always, well, if you can't pay us back, okay, you don't pay us back.
Don't worry about it. Yeah.
Don't worry about it. So it always has in the appearance of a loan. And so they give taxpayer dollars to these corporations and to these governments. For what? To bail them out of what? Bail them out of debt. Bail them out of debt. So now that money starts coming to the banks again. So all of that bailout money from the government, supposedly to have milk for little Johnny, really is to provide payments on loans to the big New York banks and other in Chicago and Los Angeles banks. That's what it's all about. And so once you understand that this is a very shrewd game, and the public goes along with it because they've been propagandized into thinking it's a benevolent or humanitarian move, you begin to think, oh my God, I've been really fooled. We've got to put a stop to that. And if you're a guy like me, you're going to say, I'm going to write a book about it and expose all this nonsense. So that's sort of my today's answer to that question.
Fantastic. So I guess what most people don't realize, and I think I've spoken about this on multiple podcasts, is, everyone keeps throwing the word capitalism around willy-nilly, but in reality, we don't have capitalism anywhere in the world today, because so long as you have a mechanism for bailouts to exist, by definition, what happens is the banks socialize every single loss, whether at their level or at their cronies' level. So in other words, we don't actually have capitalism anywhere in the world today. We have large-scale monetary socialism, wherein if you're a banker, if you're a government, if you're a large-scale corporation who's in bed with them, you get to make whatever decision you want, and it doesn't matter because, as I said earlier, heads you win, tails, everyone else loses. So it's a game of, it's an unwinnable game for us. In fact, I was doing a podcast with a lady in Sydney a couple of weeks ago, and she's sort of fighting the good fight down there against the mask mandates and against all this sort of craziness that's happening in Australia as well. And it was a funny light bulb moment, because we were discussing, she said, oh, there's a bunch of people putting a class action lawsuit together to sue the airlines for discriminating against people, forcing them to wear a mask when, there's no reason to wear a mask. And I kind of talked her through it. I said, okay, so I said, what happens if this class action lawsuit wins? And I said, they get a big windfall and the airline has to pay out. She's like, well, that's a good thing. She goes, the airline has to pay out. I said, okay. So I said, where do you think the airline's going to get that money from? And then also you sort of like, it clicked to her. She was like, holy crap, they'll just borrow it from the government, or they'll get a bailout or something of those lines, which means if we win a battle suing these idiots, we have to pay for the thing ourselves.
That's right.
It's an unwinnable game so long as you work within the framework of their system. It's like playing a game of Monopoly, and one of the players is the banker, and he can just do whatever he wants, and you're basically impoverishing yourself. It's crazy.
Yeah, and there's an extra dimension on top of that. Everything you said is 100% true, but on top of that, they're suing a corporation in most cases, or a government, in either case, but let's just stick with the corporation. The corporation doesn't exist. What is a corporation? It's an agreement. It's a piece of paper. It's an agreement. So the people who made the decision, let's go to the illustration of the pharmaceutical industry, for example. Now, we all know there's no pharmaceutical company out there that isn't a convicted felon time and time and time again. They lie, they cheat, they steal, they murder, they kill knowingly because they conceal information about adverse reactions on drugs. They say, oh, we didn't know about that. And then, 1,000, 10,000 people die or are crippled from it. And then in the court trial, you find out, oh yeah, we did have a report on that. Well, oh, yeah, we kind of buried that. Oops, yeah. So we know these corporations are criminal of the worst kind. And so somebody sues the corporation, let's say for a $5 million or $100 million lawsuit. Who pays for that? You're right. First of all, it's the stockholders and the corporation that pay for it. But secondly, ultimately, if they can't cover it by the stockholders, the government will bail them out. But now I come to my point, which is they shouldn't sue the corporation. They should sue the president and the board of directors and the chief engineers who made the decisions to bury that information. See, these guys get bonuses. The more crime they commit, they get bonuses because they made money for the company. And then, the executives don't ever pay a crime. You never hear of an executive from a pharmaceutical company going to jail. You never hear, even at the city level, this happens. I mean, this policeman or so and so violated somebody's civil rights, and so they sue the city. They sue the city.
It's a moral hazard. It's an incredible moral hazard.
Yeah, it's a way of life, and it's this veil. They have to pierce the corporate veil. They say it's a legal game, and all states have adopted it. All corporations now give immunity to the board of directors, to the decision makers, and so it's really the investors who are online for all the penalties. So until that also is corrected, we're not going to solve this problem.
Agreed. Can we talk about quickly the Mandrik mechanism? Can you explain to people what the Mandrik mechanism is?
Yeah, I spent a whole chapter in my book on that, as you know, but we don't have time for all that. It's a fascinating story for those who like puzzles. This is a puzzle to most people. It was to me. How do they create money? All right, so they create it out of nothing, Griffin says, and then he says, well, no, they create it really out of debt. Well, how can you create money out of debt? So I don't know how to shorten this down. Basically, here's what happens. You go to the bank and you ask for a loan, and they will loan you legally up to, well, more than that, but let's just stick with the old classical figures, up to 9 times more money than they actually have in the vault because of this thing called fractional reserve banking. The idea is that, well, they'll loan out 90% of it, but no more than 10% of the people are going to come in and demand their money back. So there'll always be that 10% in the vault. We don't have to worry about runs on the bank anymore, especially since we've chained all the banks together. So if 1 or 2 banks have a run, the others will help them out a little bit. It's all that nonsense. So the banks, the point of this is, are allowed to create loans, to create money that they don't have. And the asset that backs it up is usually, if it's a secured loan, it's your asset. It's your home, or your farm, or your tractor, or your car, or something like that. And there's some merit to that kind of a loan because there is a physical asset behind it. But it's not the bank's asset, it's your asset, you see. And the funny thing about that is, let's take the car. If you own the car now, and you want to borrow some money from the bank, and the bank wants that car as collateral, okay, the bank creates the money for the loan based on the value of the car, your car, and loans it to you, and then you don't pay it back. Well, then the bank gets the car, it gets to keep the car, and you wind up with the debt. Well, I guess there's some merit to that, because after all, it was your loan and your car both. So you really were the asset and the liability both. Secured loans have a certain value and a logic to them, as long as they're reasonable and not, more than 100% of the value of the asset. But now the unsecured debt, now we're talking about credit cards, and we're talking about really all of these bailout loans. They supposedly are backed up by the asset of the corporation. But if the corporation goes out of business, those assets will not be worth anything near what they're valued at in terms of the loan. If General Motors goes out of business completely, who cares about all of that stockpile of iron? You'd have to sell it off at a discount. What good are the buildings? And oh, by the way, you've got the liability of the taxes on the property and the maintenance, all that. Believe me, if any of these companies go out of business, the asset value of their collateral
cents
will
on the
not
dollar.
be.
Yeah.
10 cents on the dollar. Yeah. So it's really it's also an unsecured loan, and most of our loans, I think, I don't know what the numbers are right now, but they're in that category of unsecured loans. So now there you have it. The banks can make money literally on debt, even though there is none or very little asset to back it up, and it's a pretty good deal, as long as the system holds together and people are, the bubble doesn't burst. But, and they just make it up. I had a story that maybe I should tell that story. Here's how it works with the government. The government needs another $1 billion today. It needs $1 billion every day now, it seems like. But they don't have it, of course. All the tax money's been spent the day after it was collected, and they're spending much more than they're collecting in taxes. So what do? They got to borrow the money. Well, they can either borrow it from the public, like the people that want to buy government bonds. They think, well, that's a good investment. We'll get our money back, plus 3 or 4%, but it's solid. They don't realize what they're doing. They say, because, well, the government says it's backed by the full faith and credit of the United States government. And you can hear the Star-Spangled Banner playing in the background, The full faith and credit of what? The United States government? What is that? What it really means is that if the government runs out of money and is unable to pay you back your loan plus interest, don't worry. They'll pay it back. They guarantee to pay it back. If they have to take everything from you that you have in order to do it, they will do it. And that's really what it is. They'll tax you to pay back the loan. And so people think that's a good deal. Oh, give me some more of these bonds, And okay, but the bonds have sort of dried up now. Nobody wants to buy bonds anymore. Very few. Some big investments still do. But now they want to go to the Federal Reserve. And the Federal Reserve, for some reason, always has money to loan to them. Never has to worry about it, because they make it out of nothing based on the value, quote, value, asset value of the collateral behind the borrower. So they jack that figure way, way up out of proportion and say, well, this is a good investment, good loan. I mean, General Motors, how can you go wrong with that? And so they'll loan, $10 million or $100 million to General Motors. And the people around the bank, where did they get that money? And the answer is they just made it. They had perhaps 10% of it on their books as assets of some kind. They could have been government bonds or other securities. And Lord knows what they use for assets anymore. There used to be a pretty limited list of things they could use, but I believe today they could use almost anything. I mean, if a school kid were to write, I owe you $10 on the back of a gum wrapper and give it to them, they'd probably say, okay, that's good enough. Now we got our deposit of $10, and so now we can loan $100 on this gum wrapper. I'm exaggerating, of course, but now they accept liabilities and promises from people outside of the United States, corporations, governments other than the United States. All of these things are considered as collateral. And anybody would know, the chances of foreclosing on some of these or most of these things is zero. So we're back to the idea is really unsecured loans. So they create the money out of that and they loan it into existence. And by the time people get that money from the government, they're happy. Oh, this is money from the government. they don't realize that that just came out of nothing, and that it pollutes the value of all the other dollars that are already in existence. And that's why your purchasing power goes down. Because if you and I are sitting around a monopoly board and we're playing the game of Monopoly, and the banker is continually pumping, $100 bills into the money supply as the game progresses, and he gives it to his friends or whoever have made a deal with him on the side, naturally the cost of boardwalk is going to go up and up and up and up and up, and so that's the reality that we live under today.
Yeah, I think the elucidation there for people of the Mandrik method is, I guess for me, it's the way I try and frame it for people is just, it's this insane moral hazard where the bankers, and particularly the central bankers, they can assume whatever risk they want, because it doesn't matter, like you said, if the risk pays off or it doesn't pay off, they can just create more. So why wouldn't they just continue to lend it? And that's sort of where we potentially veer into, the Fabians and the creation of the IMF, the World Bank, and socialism is, conquering real world assets, conquering real people, not through arms, but through the issuance of fake monopoly money on the grand scale. Is like they figured out that they could do it at the nation state level, and now here we are. It's like it's a game where we're playing against the referee, and the referee just makes the rules up for whatever he wants on the day. And then as the referee gets stronger and stronger and more powerful, he's like, all right, well, let's just bring more and more players into the game, but they can't win, so I can do whatever I want here, and I'll just keep changing the rules to benefit me. So if they score a goal, they get a point, but also I get a point. Tomorrow, if they score a goal, they get 1 point, I get 2 points. So it's like this, it's this perpetual game of, they just arbitrarily, and I think in your book you mentioned Mandrik was supposed to be like some sort of character in a comic book that was an illusionist or a magician that created things, manifest things out of thin air, which is literally what this process does. But I think, as you said, where this gets bad is that it pollutes the very, you mentioned before, money is a medium of exchange. I believe money is first and foremost, performs three functions: store of value, medium of exchange, and a unit of account. But by polluting the money supply, you actually erode the first function of money, which is the store of value function. And that's the perverse effect that inflation has on people. So you've got all these people who've done the right thing, who've saved money, they've been thrifty, they want to do stuff, and they're the ones who are effectively paying an invisible tax on the mistakes that everybody else makes, which is such a strange game. Like if we played that game anywhere else in life, everyone else would point to it and say, no, that's bullshit, that's fraud, that's a scam. But we somehow have been taught that it's perfectly normal in the banking, financial, and state level world, which is madness. And we're seeing the ramifications of that today in the manifestation of basically a global attempt to imprison everyone over unfounded fears. But I guess could we talk a little bit about the Fabians and the creation of the IMF, and sort of how they've used this, the bailout game, the Mandrik method, to effectively steal the assets of everybody.
I don't know that I can make a really strong case of the connection between the Fabian Society and the bankers, although we know that there was an interlock. But the game that you're talking about, really one of the assumptions or the rules of the game, let's just call it an assumption behind the game, is that the ideology of what we call collectivism is going to going to be dominant. The collectivism will be accepted as the norm, and we'll all play by those rules. Well, what is collectivism? Collectivism is the idea that the group is more important than the individual, and that the individual must be sacrificed, if necessary, for the greater good of the greater number. I was taught that in school. I think most people were at one point or another, and it sounds so good when you first hear it. After all, doesn't that sound fair? The greater good of the greater number. But when you get to looking at it, it's one of the worst concepts you can think of, because nobody knows what the greater good of the greater number except the greater number. And yet the decisions as to what it is always being made by the smaller number. And those who rule and say, well, this is for your own good, and that is for your own good, and so forth. And you say, no, it's not. No, it's not. Oh, yes, it is. You shut up and sit down. And so that's where the Fabians come in, is with that idea. The Fabian Society, I've forgotten the day of its origin, but it's probably going on 200 years ago now. It was formed in England. It was comprised of some of the wealthiest and most educated families and personnel in England. They were the elites. They included some of the royalty, and they got the idea a long time ago that collectivism is a good thing. The whole world should adopt collectivism. They didn't volunteer to, surrender all of their money and their wealth and throw it into the pot and say divide it among the poor. They just were going to say, we're going to create a system like that, and we're going to run it, you understand, because the people out there are too damn stupid to know what's good for them. But we figured it out. It's good for them that nobody have any more than anybody else except us. And we who are ruling and administering this on behalf of everybody else. And even they figured out a way that they could defend that by saying, well, we won't own it, we'll just control it. Well, control is the definition of ownership. The most significant definition of ownership is control. So they were just, playing word games with people. So anyway, they formed the Fabian Socialist Society, they called it, and their whole idea was to generate enthusiasm, endorsement for this idea, and they did. I mean, they spent a lot of money on it, and they had little study groups all around London, and since they were the very important, influential people in society, they even formed a university, the London School of Economics, to which many of our own presidents and politicians have attended. Like President Kennedy, for instance, is a graduate of the London School of Economics, primarily, I think, because of his father being the ambassador to England and got him in, It was a very prestigious place, it still is, and they teach collectivism there. And of course, they're all strong supporters of the Federal Reserve System and other manifestations of central banks, because the collectivism cannot run without a central bank that creates money out of debt. You'll never be able to run a collectivist system on taxes, because the system will be so poor that nobody will have any money to pay taxes.
The system is bankrupt fundamentally. Exactly.
From the beginning, yeah, it has to live off of the excess production of productive people, and under a pure collectivist system, there are no productive people. Soviet Union figured that out long ago and started to move gently toward free enterprise and that kind of thing. So anyway, the Fabian Society was very instrumental in that, and I have to maybe veer a little bit from the track on this, because to me the most interesting thing about the Fabian Society is that they had two preoccupations. One was with the goal of collectivism, but the other one was with the road to the goal, the strategies and the tactics to achieve it. And this is where it really gets interesting. They had a stained glass window in their headquarters in I've forgotten the locality. Anyway, it's not important. It was in London, outskirts of London. I've been out there. I saw it, and it's a nice, very nice house. But the stained glass was in there, and it depicted some of their prominent members, and they were all standing around an anvil. The earth was on an anvil. So, like you'd have in a blacksmith's office or a factory workshop. And these guys are standing there with hammers, and they're poised, ready to strike the earth. Now, what is that all about? And then underneath it, there is a line from Omar Khayyam, and I'm going to murder this line. I should have it better memorized, but it goes something like this. Let's see. Dear love, wouldst not thou and I conspire to grasp this sorry scheme of things entire and smash it to bits and then remold it closer to the heart's desire? And there you have the strategy of the underlying strategy of everything that's going on in our world today. The Fabian strategy of destruction. Destroy it. You can't change it. You have to destroy it, and then you can rebuild it out of the ashes and the broken pieces. Let us smash it to bits, and that's why people can't understand when they say our leaders, well, they're making mistakes. Well, this won't work. Oh, this is destructive. They don't realize that that's the plan, to destroy the economy, to destroy production, to destroy morality, to destroy independence, to destroy knowledge. I mean, they want everything down to the lowest common denominator where people are just crying for survival. A drowning man is not interested in talking about what's in the Constitution. He doesn't care about the Second Amendment or the First Amendment. He just wants to get air so he can breathe. And so they want to submerge all of mankind today into that level of survival, and they're progressing very well, I might add. And at this point, people will say, here, put me in chains, whatever you need to do, give me food, give me shelter, give me water, make me well again from this illness, protect me from terrorism and pornography and viruses and crime, and, give me what I need to live. And this was all laid forth by the Fabian Society. And so I'm glad you mentioned it. Now, how does that apply to central banking? Well, I think it applies to central banking more now in the last 2 or 3 years than it did before. I think up until a couple of years ago, central banking was just content to go along raping the world and just pillaging the world. Take another 10%, another 10% off the top of all productivity. Now it's pretty clear to me that they've reached the point where they want to smash it to bits because they know they can't save it. They're pretty sure it's going to fail, really crumble. So rather than wait for that to happen, they're going to be the ones to apply the hammer to it, smash it to bits. Right now they want to destroy the economy, but don't worry, folks, they'll give you their money. Every month you'll get something and you say, oh, well, it's okay, I got money. And they're creating this money out of nothing, of course. But productivity goes to almost zero. And so money is still coming into creation without being created out of productivity. So therefore, you talk about price disparity. Prices are going to be so high. Can you imagine? I'm making this up, but can you imagine $200, $300 for a loaf of bread or something like that? Oh, but don't worry, we got the money coming to you. We'll give it to you. It'll be like Zimbabwe, where you had to take $100,000 to the store to get a cup of coffee. That's coming, and they know it. They're not stupid. But they've come to the point now where they're ready to destroy it. So people will say, this system doesn't work. This capitalist system doesn't work. We need collectivism, which is what's destroying the system in the first place. That I think is the end game. And that too is part of the Fabian origin.
So I guess what's the outcome of this sort of an end game? So it's like, you help usher in a society in which you have no more productive constituents because it's been disincentivized to the point of oblivion. So you've got a bunch of sheep, you've got a bunch of drones. What is the end game of someone who wants something like that?
Well, it's a very grim end game. I think George Orwell described it pretty well. He said the future, if we don't change it, the future will be a boot forever stomping on the human face.
See, I guess maybe this is now a good time to lead into what gives me the most hope in the world is I recently wrote an article called Fiat, Fascism, Communism, Bitcoin, Freedom and Sovereignty. And I might send it to you for you to have a bit of a read. And basically what I go in there and I discuss how the root of all of the problems that we're seeing, whether they're problems of social mobility, whether they're problems of ripping up all of our natural resources and wasting them, whether they're problems of blowing each other up in wars, whether they're whatever the issue is, we can root it all back to a monopoly on the creation of the unit through which we measure human productivity. In other words, a monopoly on money. That is the only thing. And as you sort of said, alluded to earlier, it's collectivism doesn't work unless it can fund itself. And collectivism can't fund itself through general means. It has to fund itself through fraudulent means because it's a non-functional model. It doesn't align with natural law. It creates a devolving spiral of productivity. It creates, a complete dependency on behalf of the individual, with respect to their relationship to their overlords. So the only way it can subsist is through this monopoly on money that they have. So my premise is that if we break that, not by force, but in the Hayekian method, if you remember his, I'm going to murder his saying now, which is that we will never have a good money again unless we take it back from the government in some sly roundabout way, right? Are you familiar with that quote from Hayek? Yeah.
Yes, I am.
And for me, that's where something like Bitcoin really, I find powerful. So I want to throw a couple things at you here, and just as we dialogue this, because I think for me, not cryptocurrency. Crypto is just a bunch of fiat issued by a bunch of morons who think that government's bad, but hey, come and trust me because I'm a 20-year-old nerd that can print his own money. Bitcoin stands above all fiat because it is something that is selected at the individual level, not at the center. So Bitcoin is a system of rules, not of rulers. And I guess I'll start with a couple of definitions here. So would you agree that the difference between fiat and organic money is fiat is enforced from the center, whereas organic or functional money is chosen at the edge. It's chosen by the individual and it's voluntary. Would we agree with that as a good definition?
Yeah, I think that's pretty good. Whether we call that organic or free choice or free market money, the word isn't important, but the concept is extremely valuable. Yes.
So it should be voluntary and it should be chosen by the individual, not by the center.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Fantastic. And would you agree that the thing that we generally choose as individual is either an object or a unit which has specific properties, right? So in my study of monetary history, gold was selected not by decree, not by the fiat of some individual institution, but it was selected all around the world independently by all sorts of different, cultures and societies because it had some specific properties. Those properties being it's durable. Imagine spending all of your life working for salt and then it rains and you just lost all of your wealth, right? So salt doesn't work very well for money. So all these things don't work very well for money, but we naturally as human beings converge upon the most functional object that can represent the product of our time and labor. So, if we look at gold's properties, we said durable, it's quite portable, it's relatively divisible, it's recognizable, it's fungible. Gold is the same wherever you are in the world. Gold is gold, but most importantly, it's quite scarce. You can't just create gold out of thin air, and I think that's one of the most important properties of money, as opposed to all of the other things. So, for me, when I think about Bitcoin and when I think about intrinsic value, because everyone always talks about Bitcoin having no intrinsic value, it's just some computer code. I always counter with, well, gold doesn't really have intrinsic value either, but gold has properties that people find valuable, and that people have individually chosen over the millennia as a object to represent the product of their labor, because you can't print it, because it's durable, portable, it has properties. So are we sort of, have I said anything in disagreement so far as we're going through this?
No, I wouldn't disagree with that, but I think I would add one more aspect to that definition, in that it also has value. Forget the word intrinsic value. It has value for something other than being a medium of exchange, something I was mentioning before. So even if all of a sudden something would happen that there was a better medium of exchange that showed up, and people all switched over to that, and you were left holding a pot of gold, well, it might not be as valuable as it was before, but it still has value for something. It's used in industry, used in jewelry, and so forth, used in chemistry. So I think we have to add that to it. It has a value independent of money.
To whomever can use it, exactly.
Of course.
So and see, this is where I would argue that a perfect money should have no other use in society other than as money. Whereas, gold, my prediction on gold is that it'll actually go towards its commodity value, not its monetary value. So if you look at, gold's value, I think a small sliver of it is its commodity value, its functional value, or its practical use. And the majority of gold's so-called value is actually a monetary premium, more than anything else. So with the creation of, or with the emergence of a better quality money, what will happen is, Gresham's law, good money will push out bad money from the market. People want to hold, through the sheer force of economic Darwinism, the better form of money. And this is where I would argue, Bitcoin is such a powerful concept, because it is not something that, how can I put it? It's not issued by a central authority. It is not enforced at the center. It is something that you and I, as individuals, voluntarily choose to run, and we run it, or we choose to use Bitcoin, we choose to adopt it because it's got a clear set of rules. So Bitcoin's rules are effectively like a constitution, but the constitution is not enforced by an oligarchy or a monopoly. The constitution is actually enforced by every participant on the network. So it's the mechanism of consensus, as opposed to some sort of central issuance by fiat. So how much of that element of Bitcoin are you familiar with yourself?
I think I'm fairly familiar with all of that, and I agree with it. But there's something there that I'm having a little trouble with, but I don't want to interrupt you. I'll let you finish.
No, it's okay.
I think
let's dive in.
I think most students on this topic have been through all of the the proven values of a good money system. We're not talking about what is money or what is not money. We're talking about what is good money and what is okay money and what is bad money. As long as it's a medium of exchange, it's money. But some is better than others, and so that's how I look at it. One of the things that has never been on that list, but never needed to be on that list until crypto came along, and one that I would argue that it should be on the list, and that is the ability to possess it. And this becomes significant because, as we all know, the crypto is digital. It doesn't exist in a physical form, but it exists in blockchains and exists in electronic impulses and so forth. But in that sense, it's sort of abstract. It's not a physical thing that you can possess. You cannot take it and run across the border with it. You cannot, you cannot possess it. And this is, I think, a serious issue, especially now when we know that all the banks and all the governments are pushing as hard as they can to encourage a crypto universe. They want to get rid of even our current fiat money. They want to get rid of it because you can possess it. You can be independent of the system, and you can stick it in your pocket or in your mattress, or you can stash it in the trunk of your car. I don't know. You can possess it. And even if the power goes out, you got it. And all of these things. So I just wanted to say that is, I'd like to add that to the list, that's all.
Let's debunk this, because Bitcoin's actually, I believe, the only thing on the planet that you can possess, truly possess. I don't think you can possess anything else other than Bitcoin. So let's look at it this way. Bitcoin is not on a blockchain. Bitcoin is fundamentally information. So how do you possess the words in your book, for example? What's the mechanism of possession there?
Well, it's not possessible, and that's why it's no good as money. The words in a book are not good as money. No, the whole book might have some value, but if nothing more than to light and cause some heat to come out of the flame. But the words. That's
practical value again. Okay, so talk to me about, how do you define possession?
Well, okay, in the sense that I'm holding it in my mind, it's something you could hold in your hand, something that you could keep from somebody else if you wanted to. You could hide it. You can freely use it or not to use it as you wish. Unlimited access and use of something.
Okay, so are you familiar with Bitcoin, the self-custody element of Bitcoin? The fact that if you hold your private key, you hold your Bitcoin?
By the way, let me state, I own Bitcoin and some other as well, and I have a cold wallet, I think you're referring to. And I understand the value of that. And I understand that part of it. But I'm primarily holding cryptocurrencies of various kinds out of curiosity, out of conviction that it's a highly speculative commodity, right? Well, not a commodity, but something very speculative at the moment, and somebody's going to make a lot of money on it, and I intend to be one of those people. But that doesn't make it a good money. It just makes it a speculative item that's going to grow in value, and I don't intend to keep all my assets there, because I think, like all speculative things, it's probably going to, it's volatile, but it may be replaced by something else someday. And when the power goes out, and of course that's true of even present money systems, which is why I don't like USDs either, or any of the fiat currencies, why I like preferably gold or silver, and secondly, at least some paper currency that is still there when the lights go out.
So in a scenario where the lights go out, how useful do you really think gold or silver would be? Because I think
I think it would be extremely useful, because what else are you going to barter?
Lead, chickens, and eggs. I always say to people, if the power goes out, you need lead and chickens.
Well, that is true. I'm not arguing against that. Maybe lead and chickens are more important, but if you have anything more in mind than just eating, or defending yourself against a foe, and you wanted to acquire something of more substance than that, you'd have to have a lot of chickens and a lot of lead, maybe, if you wanted. It's the old argument. You want something that's very, very scarce, and people will always swap something of scarcity if they know it will likely be accepted by somebody else. So I'm not arguing against what you're saying. I'm just saying that. By the way, I am trying to get some chickens, but where I am right now, the coyotes would probably get to them first. I think it's a good idea.
So, okay, so you, in your mind, you think that a potential weakness of, because see, again, I'm very adamant that all of the cryptocurrencies are just a scam. Bitcoin is not a cryptocurrency. Bitcoin is sound money, and it is sound money because it exhibits properties of a perfect money. A money should be something that is portable, divisible, durable, recognizable, verifiable, and fundamentally fixed in supply. And Bitcoin exhibits all of those properties.
They do, except I would add two more properties to the list. That's all. I would add the idea that it has to be deliverable. You have to possess it, for one thing, and it should. And the reason the people will accept it The reason people will accept it, and the only reason people will accept it, is because they believe that they can give it to someone else who will accept it. And so that's a psychological element. And those things can fail. They can be changed with passage of time. And the one thing that doesn't change, though, is, well, that's not true either. It's a lot slower to change, is the actual convenient use of something like a tool, a hammer, a saw, a gun, as you say, a bullet, lead. These things, those things make better money even. And that's how it all started, with the metals, because the metals were exchanged value because they were useful as weapons and shields and swords and, that kind of thing. So that's, I think, a very important element for good money. Now, it could be a fair money, but a good money, I would want to have that element to it as well.
Yeah. Okay. So I was just look. Let's see. For me, I don't believe we're going to move into a world in which the power goes out, because I think that's far more detrimental than, if the power goes out, people die of starvation very quickly, because the entire supply chain is so contingent on everything working just in time. If the power goes out, there's a much larger catastrophe that awaits us than
it's huge. And that's when you need something that is tangible. Really, that's when you need something that's tangible. I think I agree with you. I don't anticipate the power going out, but it's certainly not off the table. And it might go off for a long time and then come back on just to reduce the population. Those are heavy thoughts, but I don't put it past these people to do things like that. And while we're on this topic, I want to emphasize I'm not talking against cryptocurrencies or bitcoins. Please understand that. But I'm trying to pull back a little bit bigger from the typical arguments that have convinced everybody, including myself, that Bitcoin and certain other of these cryptos are a good place to put what you have in the way of savings right now. But I also can't help but notice that the governments and the banks are solidly behind this whole movement. And I have come to realize lately that this is the realization of their long-held dream, which is a cashless society. The would-be rulers of the world could hardly wait to come up with a cashless society, because that way they would control our means of commerce without having us with the option to use cash. We can't hold it, you can't possess it, you can't hide it, you can't slip it to somebody. Say, well, how about doing this under the table? You can't do any of that. It's all out in the open. And they can hardly wait to get a system like that where everything is measured and controlled. And now, I'd like to address one more thing.
Should they be able to control it, though?
They will definitely be able to control it, and I'd like to explain why I think that is true. They may not be able to control the individual cryptos as long as it's a separate unit in itself, a separate crypto, and changes within its own members. But to go out to buy a cup of coffee or pay your rent or gasoline or buy groceries or go to the theater and exchange it outside of your tight-knit little group, you have to go through an exchange and our clearinghouse. And they're building those right now. The IMF has been working on that for at least 2 years, to my knowledge. A clearinghouse in which every commodity and every service in the universe will have a big long number on it to identify it. Now, they already have a lot of that done. If you do your income tax, they want to know what kind of business you're in, and then they want to know a subcategory within your business, and each of those has a code. They're building on that system to add even more numbers to identify whether you have a pencil that's 6 inches long or 7 inches long, and whether it's gold or blue. Each one will have a different number. And in order to buy anything, it'll have to have that number. This is what they're working toward. And that has to go against a central clearinghouse, and it's a yes or a no on it. And they will have the control over the yes or the no. Now, you may be able to keep your crypto, but you won't be able to spend it on anything except outside of your other group. And then on top of that, they're looking desperately at the kill switch. They want to identify each of us, and we'll have a number too. And anytime we try to use the clearinghouse for anything, it'll say, sorry, your account is closed.
Yeah, but see, Bitcoin doesn't require a clearinghouse. That's the whole
Well,
point.
not at the present.
Bitcoin's well, it
Yeah.
never will
Well, right. Yeah.
because
All right.
Bitcoin fundamentally is the monetary unit on its own monetary network. So
Yes,
it is that train that is going in the opposite direction. It's
but
not
my friend,
it has
do you know how
nothing to
long?
do.
I think you must know how long it takes to make a Bitcoin transaction today, don't you?
It doesn't matter. So
Oh,
Bitcoin
it
is
does matter.
about
It doesn't.
settlement.
Yes, if it takes 2 days to transact to buy a cup of coffee, how good is it?
No, Bitcoin, you would never use Bitcoin as a transactional product. Bitcoin is a
But
settlement network, and you
hmm
abstract Bitcoin through second layer tech. So, like the Lightning
uh,
Network, I can send
and
you a
who controls
fraction of a cent.
who controls
Nobody,
that?
nobody,
Nobody. Nobody.
nobody controls Lightning. I can open a Lightning channel myself. You can open a Lightning channel now, and I can send it to you. No permission required. No any third party required. It is an abstraction of the Bitcoin's primary layer.
Well, I'm
So
anxious to know more about that one.
it is an entire financial network that is
Hmm.
independent of the old system. It requires no permission, nothing, zero. Like it is completely devoid of anything to do with a government, a central authority, a issuer, or anything like that. It is just purely a set of rules, and you and I can. So the way the Lightning Network works, just to sort of give you a mental model, is like a bar tab. You and I can open up a channel of Bitcoin, and you and I can trade between each other millions of times per second,
Hmm.
any amount that we want, small or large.
Hmm.
And what we do is each time we do a transaction, we net off the difference. So if we start with 10, I send you one, you now have 11, I have nine. Then you send me five, I have 14, you have six, right? So we can go back and forth as many times as we want, and then we
Okay.
settle when we need to.
Okay.
So that
This I
kind of
understand.
mechanism, yeah.
I think they call this a side chain, don't they?
Well, it's a second layer, so it's kind of, you
Yeah.
could call it a side chain, but it's not a
Yeah.
chain. So Lightning Network is
Well,
actually a network.
yeah,
It
I
doesn't function
understand.
as a chain.
Okay. Then I do understand the principle you're talking about. It functions outside of the Bitcoin. And then at the end of the day, or maybe at periodic points along the day, there are single transactions that settle all together. And so those are the
Correct.
ones that take time. But now, why do we need more than one of those?
We don't. All we need is Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is the sound money
Hmm.
layer. It's the
Hmm.
settlement layer that is incorruptible, and it has the fixed set of rules that are voluntarily opted into by everyone. So that's what makes it perfect money. And then we abstract throughput, because when you have a whole network of these tabs basically open, you could send money instantly to anyone anywhere in the world for free, effectively, for a
If they're in,
fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a cent.
if they're signed up to that network, right?
And it's easy to do. You just download an app.
Oh,
It's
it's easy
free.
to do. So we have to get everybody in the world to sign up to one network, which would take
Not
a little,
one
right?
network. No. It's
Well,
not a single network. We are the network.
okay.
We are the network. So
So
it's kind of like you
it's one
open a
network then,
channel.
a
It's
channel.
a it is a how can we define this? It is, yeah, one network, but it is a network in which the way it functions is you only are connected to to one person on one side and another person on the other side. And that's as far as your communication goes. Every single channel that is opened is connected to the two participants next to you, but they're
Mhm.
all interconnected in like a web, like a global web, and there's no way of knowing who is what on the network.
Well, I have understood that you may not know what, but you will know who by the
No,
transactions.
you cannot know who. So only
A,
if you and
AI
the
AI will know who because they'll match your transactions up to purchase patterns, and they'll know exactly who you are in a split second, because you continually
not, not
buy from a store near you, or you go to the theater, or the same theater, and all of a sudden it
that's a misconception. That's a misconception, because see that
no.
that would so on the Bitcoin network and on the Lightning network, a merchant and a consumer can literally, they don't have to have any identifiable information. So it's just an address that has no relationship to the business or the individual or anything. So
Mm-hmm.
you and I, we could even do it live if you want to. You can download an app quickly, which I can call it. It's called Wallet of Satoshi, and
Oh,
I can
oh,
send you a Satoshi
I have
now.
no doubt that it'll work. I'm just wondering about how it becomes universal. Because my understanding, and as I told you
Natural
before,
selection.
off air before we started, I am not a technician on these things.
Mm, mm,
Uh, I know how they work, but when it comes down to things like we're talking about now, I need a lot of guidance. I'd be most
mm.
anxious to look at whatever you've got because I need to be informed on it. The thing that I've observed is that the banks and the governments are working full speed to get into this field. And
Of
I
course they
know
are.
that they want to create a social credit system like they have
Yep.
in China,
Yep.
and they intend to build that on the back of a universal crypto system, so that they can
Well,
throw the
that
switch and turn you off and turn me
yeah.
off if they want to.
Correct. The ultimate, like, if you know, I don't care what you say. All I care is what you do. So show me your bank account, and I'll tell you what you believe. So if you can have the capacity to dictate someone's human action by turning their capacity to spend on and off, you own them 100%.
Hmm.
Bitcoin is literally our only opportunity to have a sovereign money and self-sovereign money, because they can't flick any switch on Bitcoin. There is zero that any nation state, any government, any global government can do to Bitcoin, because its rules are enforced at the individual layer. They can't change
Well,
anything on there.
okay, I understand that, and I'm not trying to debate you. This is really interesting to me,
Yeah,
and I
yeah.
want to learn. I want you what you're saying to be true. I want that to be true very badly. But I'm thinking to myself that if they cannot turn off the switch on Bitcoin, all right, how can I use? I'm not going to use Bitcoin when I go out and buy my Starbucks. I'm going to use one of these side chains that you're describing because it takes too long for a Bitcoin transaction and it's too expensive. I mean, the transaction might be cost more. In fact, I know it would cost more than the Starbucks. So I've got
Correct.
to do business day to day for the things I want to buy outside of Bitcoin onto one of these side chains.
It's not outside of Bitcoin. So it actually, you're still sending Bitcoin, but you're sending fractions of a Bitcoin on a tab network effectively.
And
So it's still Bitcoin.
no one can access that network, and
Anyone can access the network, because it's
mhm.
voluntary participation by you as an individual to open a channel to interact with someone else. And you can close that channel, you can interact with whoever you want. And when I say somebody else, I mean just another address. That's all it is. So
Mhm.
it's not, you're not interacting with a business or a person or
Mhm.
anybody. Bitcoin doesn't recognize individuals, it doesn't recognize businesses, it's all blind. All Bitcoin recognizes is if two if a pair of transactors, a sender or receiver,
Mhm.
make a voluntary transaction, and the voluntary transaction can only be pushed, it cannot be pulled. So as
Okay,
a result,
but what's all this clearinghouse business now? What? Okay, so it's going through. Somebody's operating that. Somebody set it up. So,
we are all operating it ourselves. You actually
well,
become the operator.
well, then we're talking about something different because I'm aware. I think I'm aware that some of the large retail stores, like like May Company, for example, would have its
Mm-hmm.
own sidechain, and they gather all of the crypto transactions of the day, perhaps, or the hour, and they make large transactions in Bitcoin only once or twice or three times a day. But meanwhile, it's all in the hands of the May Company.
Okay, so the May company can create a channel themselves, and they
Hmm.
can interact with many customers if they want. So they would basically, what that they would be called effectively, like, you could call them a hub in some sense, because they would have more liquidity because they have more incoming transactions. They don't
Yeah,
know who any of the customers are because there's no identifying information. They just have an inflow of money, and they
right.
might need to settle out on a regular basis. But you and I, as consumers, for us to interact with their Lightning node effectively, we would just need to open a channel, or we'd need to have a Lightning enabled wallet in order for us to send them Bitcoin on the Lightning network. But
Hmm.
it's not like they don't own it, they're not running it, they're running their own node, but their node has no bearing on us, if that makes sense.
Well, that part makes sense. Well, I tell you what, this sounds very promising. Where can I find more information on that and
I
dig
can
down into the nitty gritties?
I can send you a short publication that I wrote a little while ago called, the Bitcoin Times, and it talks through, you know, Bitcoin specifically, and then it talks to how Lightning is able to abstract all of this so that we can have Bitcoin's security guarantee and incorruptibility at the base layer, and we can abstract throughput. Because this is where all these other idiots in crypto, and this is why I hate crypto so much more broadly. Like, the only thing I'm interested in is Bitcoin because it's sound money, and then we can abstract everything in the same way as nature does it. When you look at the body, the human body is made up of primary arteries, and then the arteries split off into veins and into capillaries. That's efficient natural design. So in the same way as Bitcoin, you've got this core chain which is incorruptible, and that's where the settlement happens. That's where there is a cost to perform a Bitcoin transaction, because that creates a fee market on the network. But then we start to abstract things. So I'm more than happy to send you a bit of information on that.
Yeah, I have no problem with the Bitcoin side of it, because I know that's incorruptible as long as you can get at it. And but I'm more concerned about what happens outside of it. And I keep wondering, these guys at the highest levels of government and banks are not stupid. Why are they so enthusiastic about this project?
They're not enthusiastic. They've hated it since the beginning. Their problem at the moment is that they have been denouncing it for so long, and Bitcoin is up 1 billion% since they've been wrong. So now this is my favorite thing about Bitcoin, is that it turns their greed against them. So now if they're in a position where they have no skin in the game, where they're not holding any Bitcoin, they're going to become obsolete very, very quickly. Imagine a bank not owning gold. Now some of the smaller banks, obviously they don't, but if you're anyone with some sense, you're going to try and hold some real assets on your balance sheet and give people the bullshit. So now they're all stuck in basically a Faustian bargain, which is, in the short term, if they don't put some Bitcoin on their balance sheet, if they don't do something, they're fucked. Now, they will go and they'll create political theater. So all these words like blockchain, here's a fun fact for you. The word blockchain doesn't even exist in the Bitcoin white paper. The word blockchain was created 3 years after Bitcoin was released by a group of bankers who tried to discredit the notion of Bitcoin and say that it was built on a blockchain. Bitcoin and blockchain has nothing to do with each other. Like, Bitcoin is actually fundamentally a time chain. It just happens to have a data architecture which groups transactions together in chunks that one could call, a blockchain. But the word blockchain is it's a bank derived name. So all of this other shit, crypto, Ethereum, blockchain, all that crap is definitely stuff that the banks are interested in, because they're looking at selling people Ponzi schemes and keeping up their fiat game. What you won't find is a bank that actually wants to talk good about Bitcoin, but at the same time, what they're doing behind the scenes is they're putting some of their balance sheet on Bitcoin. They're buying and putting Bitcoin on their balance sheet through the sheer force of economic preservation, because it is the best money on the face of the planet. So it's a really interesting dynamic. Is they'll make all this noise, they'll confuse the shit out of people with crypto and blockchain and this shit and that shit and all of this garbage, and they'll send people there with all the snake oil salesmen, like with all the fool's gold basically, so that they can try and buy up as much Bitcoin as they can, because they want it on their balance sheet. So what we need to do is we need to buy the shit before they do.
Well, I like your reasoning. One thing I like to see, and maybe this is a project you'd like to take on, if you could write a paper on how the people in China could use blockchain to get out of the social credit score system that they're in.
They can't use blockchain. They can use Bitcoin.
Excuse me, I said it wrong. I meant to say Bitcoin. Yes.
Yeah. Well, the only way to get out of the social credit system is to operate on a parallel monetary system that the social credit owner can't dictate, can't mandate. Bitcoin is the only choice, the only hope in hell that the Chinese people have, and any of us have, is to not be under the boot of the fiat system, which they pull the strings on. If we opt out, not only do we start to starve the beast because we move our productive capacity and wealth off their monetary network, but more importantly is we strengthen it amongst us, because the more critical mass we have, the more economic mass we have on a network that sits outside of theirs, the more they starve and the more we prosper. And and fundamentally, like you mentioned before, this idea of cash, like Bitcoin is fundamentally cash. If we look at the definition of cash, it means a monetary bearer instrument. And that's effectively what Bitcoin is. It is a bearer instrument in the digital sense, is that I own my Bitcoin. And if I have memorized my private key, the seed phrase to my key, nothing, no power on the universe can take it from me. It's up here. That is true possession. And I, and only I, can choose to part with it by sending it to you, should I choose to. If I don't choose to, I don't have to. It's completely mine. And that is the core definition of a sovereign cash at the individual level.
So what's the answer to the people in China? If I were in China right now, what could I do to, what would you recommend I do to get out of the social score system?
You download a Bitcoin wallet and you put all your wealth into Bitcoin, and you build communities where other people are on Bitcoin, and you trade products and services for the Bitcoin. So you use your Bitcoin as the medium of exchange, as the monetary unit, but you continue doing what humans do, which is you grow, chickens, you farm the cattle, you make the vegetables. So people need to trade, so that we need to build these sub communities within it, but we can't do it on the government's monetary system. We need to do it on our monetary system. So the first thing they need to do is download a Bitcoin wallet and take their Bitcoin into their own custody, because you can send Bitcoin to anyone, irrespective of what the Chinese government does. They can't stop a Bitcoin transaction going through. They can't do that. So as a result, by definition, you are off the credit system and you're on your own system, by consensus with others.
If I'm a Chinese citizen and I do what you just said, and I have to build my own community now, how do I get the airline company to join my community? How do I get the grocery store and my landlord and my clothier and all of that? How do I get them to be in my community?
It has to start small, Ed. So, we have to start with the local grocery. We have to start with all of these people. So we all need to find people who also don't want to be part of the social credit system. So let's put ourselves in the shoes of the merchant who's selling the groceries. That merchant can choose to have, their government decreed payment system where all the money goes through. But hey, that merchant can also have a spare phone lying around where they can accept Bitcoin from anyone who comes in, and nobody needs to know.
Do you
in
think
the same way as they could accept cash?
So the Chinese government certainly would not approve of that. So that would be, they'd be in the black market, which I understand is pretty big in China, but it always is in any tyrannical system. But that's the only way. Now I have a better understanding. So we're back to my concept. It has to be in your own little community of people and friends. But if you want to get out into the bigger world, you've got to leave the comfort of your secure system.
Well, that's the thing. So all of these, revolutions have to start from the bottom up. So long as revolutions are top down, all we're doing is we're changing the dictator and we're falling into the same trap as we were before. So, Bitcoin allows, whenever I hear the word black market, I always think free market, because fundamentally a black market is a free market, right?
That's what it is. So, exactly.
And Bitcoin, I fundamentally believe is black market money because it's free market money. It doesn't require permission from anyone, and it is organic, it's emergent. So it's something that we at the individual level, at the community level, need to opt into and decide to use ourselves, on the basis that we don't want to have our commerce, our transaction, our human action dictated by some pack of bureaucrats or some, draconian dystopian morons. So, with Bitcoin, it gives us that capacity, and it's a very efficient way to do it. It's much harder to do that. Imagine trying to do what we're talking about now, like a grassroots uprising, but having to do it with gold or paper. It's much harder because they're physical. They're much easier to confiscate. They're much easier to steal. They're much easier to target. Whereas having a Bitcoin, like a Lightning wallet, you could print the barcode out and just have the barcode there. People can send it there. And then if you think something's going to happen, you just rip up the piece of paper, it's gone. No one can prove anything. Bitcoin doesn't care about your identity. So it's so much more powerful as a black market money.
Well, you don't have to sell me on the advantages. You know, I recognize all of those, and that they're powerful. But you've answered my question. That what I didn't understand is that you were still talking about working within a channel. I think is the word you used. You have a channel, and you have to build that channel. And you have to start somewhere and start small and build. And but all right, that answers my question. It's not, in order to get out into the real world and do it like right away, you've got to get out of your system and go through some kind of a clearinghouse, is the word I've heard used. May not be the correct word, but that's what they're trying to do with the IMF, is to build a clearinghouse so that all
100% going to do that.
Yeah, everybody wants to do that, right? Because they want everything to come through their hands.
Correct.
Yeah. So, and even though it may not have personal identification as it comes through, it has an on-off switch. It has a valve you can turn off and say, okay, this one doesn't work anymore. And that's where we don't want the government to get involved.
Correct. And that's why the only way is for us to opt completely out and do it ourselves. We don't need permission. You know, again, Lightning and Bitcoin, they're all peer-to-peer. They don't require a third party to operate a channel. Like the channel is operated between you and I, not because of a third party. And as a result, they have absolutely zero bearing. We don't need their clearinghouses. We don't need shit. And effectively, I think what's going to happen with this over the coming decade is society will fundamentally bifurcate. You will have freedom money, which is Bitcoin, and you'll have free individuals who can dictate and mandate their own human action themselves as sovereign individuals. And on the flip side, you're going to have effectively serfs and slaves who any transaction they make has to run through one of these clearinghouses. And the institutions and the banks and the IMF, whoever it is going to dictate every move that person and individual can make. Will dictate what they can buy, when they can buy it, how they can buy it, when they can use their money. Whereas us over here on Bitcoin will be globally interconnected, but directly with each other as opposed to through some intermediary. And as a result, we actually own our lives. We become free sovereign individuals with Bitcoin. In the absence of it, we're all fucked, basically. And sorry to swear, but like we are genuinely all screwed without it.
And you feel that the powers that be that control the police and all the powers of coercion will just leave us alone?
Absolutely not. So this is why it's so important for us to keep bringing other people into the fold, because the more the economic mass of Bitcoin grows, the more the productive capital moves out of their shit into Bitcoin. And the more they do that, we actually starve the beast. So Bitcoin is not only an opt-out into some, Galt's Gulch, but more importantly, it's a mechanism for defunding the existing system. Because as we defund it, they have a smaller and smaller base from which to extort, and they can't extort our Bitcoin. Like when you self-custody a Bitcoin, like if you're stupid enough to keep your Bitcoin on an exchange, then yes, the risk exists that someone will take your Bitcoin. But if you self-custody it, they cannot do anything. So as a result, we actually starve the beast. So that's why, like when I talk to people about Bitcoin, this is why I'm so also adamant about it's crypto is just a distraction that the bankers try and use to have people not put their economic capital into Bitcoin. You know, they distract them into all of this other garbage so that Bitcoin's economic mass doesn't grow so quickly. That's their mechanism for attacking Bitcoin, because they can't change the actual network itself. They help fund all of these scams basically to confuse people into buying shitcoins instead of moving their economic capacity, their economic wealth into Bitcoin, because that's the thing that they're most afraid of. And the faster we do that, the more Bitcoin scales up, the sooner they become bankrupt, and we are the ones who wield the economic power, but not as a cartel, but as a network of free individuals who own our own economic significance. which is really
Well,
powerful.
it's a beautiful idea. I hope you're right in every sense, but I'm anxious to learn more. What did you call that side chain? I called it. You had another name for it.
The Lightning Network.
The
So
Lightning
it's a
Network.
second
I,
layer network. Yeah.
I'm anxious to know more about that. So, I presume I can find it on the internet. But if you have something that's reliable, I sure would
I'll
like
s-
to see it.
I'll send you a
I
short paper.
Yeah. Oh, very good. Thank you. So it's an interesting world in which we live. I think that these people are not going to let us alone, even if
They're
I
not
mean, you said we'll make them bankrupt. They've been bankrupt from the day they started. It doesn't make any difference as long as they have the
true, but
guns.
yeah, as long as they have the guns, but they've got to pay for the guns, and the way they pay for the guns is they keep inflating, and by us using their money, that we actually substantiate their inflation and their taxation. If we opt out, they can't inflate us, they can't tax us, they're fucked. And like that is the only way. There is
Hmm.
no other way. So
Well,
yeah,
well. Anyway, I'm anxious to learn more, and I'm all for Bitcoin. I have, as I told you, I have some. I think it
good.
makes me feel good to know that I'm in the game anyway. But I would not recommend that anybody put more there than they could afford to lose. That's just a sort of a conservative statement. You probably disagree totally with that. And I could understand from your
Yeah,
perspective, yes, that would be a silly thing to do. You want to put everything into it. Anyway,
yeah.
I'm
Well,
still learning,
I,
and we're going to see how this all turns out very shortly, I think.
we will, we will. Ed,
Yeah.
thank you so much. Can we quickly talk about the Red Pill Expo
Oh,
before we
I'd
wrap
love to
this up?
talk about. I would love to talk about that. Yes. So what can I say? I was going to show you the screen, except that the Red Pill Expo has been around now. This is the sixth one coming up, and the whole idea is built on the meme of the movie, the sci-fi movie called The Matrix, in which the leading characters take the red pill and they break out of their illusions, their deep sleep, they're they've been well, they're all hooked up to a giant computer and they're being used only for the the brain power they have. And but a few of them escape and they find out that my gosh, I've been living in an illusion, and they want to know what life is all about. Really, it's very harsh. But if you want to stay in the real world and know reality, you take the red pill. If you want to go back to sleep and enjoy your illusions and but still be
Hmm.
just nothing but tied up to a machine, then take the blue pill. So that was the meme that we started with, and everything that we've been talking about here and many more items similar to it could be framed in that context of breaking out of the illusion and seeing life the way it really is. Because at my age, I've come to realize that almost everything as a young person, almost everything that I really thought was important in life, and I still think is important in life, I had completely the opposite perspective on it. I was completely living in an illusion. I'm sure I'm going to learn more too along the way. So, and these are important things. They affect our lifestyle, they affect our future. Just like what we're talking about is going to affect our future profoundly. So, what is the red pill and what is the illusion versus the reality about money? I want to know everything about it, and that's the attitude we take with all of the topics having to do not only with money but with health and pandemics and
Hmm.
crime
Hmm.
and social matters. Everything. There's no taboo. So we've rounded up some of the best speakers in the world that we can find on various red pill type topics, and that's what the Red Pill Expo is all about. I urge people to come onto our website, which is redpillexpo.org, and if I can still bring up my screen and just give you an idea of what that looks like. Let me see. Screen. Oh, I need to be enabled again to show the screen.
All right, let's
Or maybe
pop
you can
this
show.
over.
Can you pull it up on your end?
I think
Redpillexpo.org?
you should be able to pull it up now.
Oh,
Go
okay.
ahead.
Well then, then I got to go click on it. There, I'm clicking on it, and it should come up here in a second.
I'll put the link in the show notes so that people can find it in any
Yeah,
case.
there it is. And so this is our website, and I don't know who that fellow is there on the left, but ignore him.
Some guy.
Some guy. But we've got really top speakers here. David Martin, well, you can read this on the screen. He's a scientist, an advisor to industry and governments. He's going to talk on a sort of a philosophical topic, which is when bravery is not enough, the economics of tyranny. It's what you and I were talking about a moment ago. When they can control your bread and your shelter and your health care and everything, they control you. You're through. And being brave against guns and bombs is not enough. Old style warfare is gone. This is the new style warfare. Brad Weeks is a doctor, and he's going to talk about why public health policies are not based on actual science. And here's a guy I can hardly wait to hear, David Resnick. I've known about him for a long time, and I thought he was gone. I found him just about 2 months ago. David was active during the HIV theater, very much like the COVID theater of today. I became aware of all the falsehoods and the fakery during the AIDS so-called pandemic. But I was alone. I mean, I was in the wilderness. People thought I was completely off my rocker when I told them that the virus had never been identified, it had never been photographed under an electron microscope. The test for AIDS wasn't for AIDS. It was for almost anything else. You could test positive with the common cold. And people would look at me like, where are you getting this garbage from? But it's all true. I didn't know it at the time, but I was getting a lot of it from guys like David Resnick, who is a former researcher at Abbott Laboratories. He was sort of on the inside, and he discovered shortly in his career that this was all phony. And of course, naturally, then they tried to discredit him and toss him out of the fraternity and all of that. And I came across, I'll just tell you a little side story. I came across the truth of this at the end of the AIDS episode. We were told that everybody in America was going to die, or half the people were going to die, and that didn't happen, of course. Discovered that it was mostly just among the gay community in San Francisco. And then somebody said, well, yeah, but look what they've done to their immune systems. Much of those people were taking poppers and all kinds of cocaine and everything to enlighten the sexual experience, and their immune systems were shot. Of course they'd have autoimmune deficiency disorder. Oh, well, that was discredited. No, it's a virus. It's a virus. Anyway, then they said it was all going to Africa. The people in Africa were dying, millions and millions of them. Another 6 months and everybody will be dead in Africa. I thought, oh my gosh, those poor people, the death rate is terrible. And then about a year later, I was looking through some statistics put out by the World Health Organization, I believe, showing the total deaths and the deaths from different diseases in the different countries in Africa. And I'm looking along, and all of a sudden, there's this big spike of deaths attributed to AIDS. There it is. Oh my gosh, millions and millions of people. And then my eye wandered to the right end of the column, and there was the total number of deaths for all causes combined. And I looked at the number, and I looked up one column to the number for the year before, and it was practically the same. I looked up to the year before, it was practically the same. And I looked down across the line again, and I started looking at the other causes of death, like pneumonia, malnutrition, drowning, malaria, yeah, obesity, I don't know, even murders, I think, were in there. But most of those causes, those from health disorders, they had all dropped to practically zero. And it dawned on me, my God, all they did was relabel those other deaths as AIDS. And that's what this guy Dave Resnick was telling us. And that's exactly what they're doing today in the COVID theater. All these AIDS cases and deaths, and you look, there's nobody died from pneumonia, from flu this year. Nobody. But they sure, okay.
We have a miraculous cure for the flu this year. It's hilarious.
Yeah, and so can't people see this? Anyway, Resnick is going to talk about his experiences back in the early days with AIDS. I think I can hardly wait. Of course, there's Del Bigtrees, the vaccine advocate. Everybody knows about him. Shiva Ayyadurai is a PhD. He made a big splash here at the beginning of 2020. He'll be talking from a political perspective, first of all, because he ran for Senate and they stole the election from him. I think he can prove that pretty conclusively. But his comments will be mostly on the people who are doing this and what their economic and social objectives are. Andrew Kaufman is an MD. He's really a controversial guy today, I'll tell you, because he's doing exactly what Resnick did. He said, virus? Virus? What virus? There is no virus, and nobody can prove that it even exists. So you're going to want to hear that one. Oh, David Summerall was there at the Capitol on January 6th. He took a camera crew with him, and he was just going to document what was happening there, expecting it to be a patriotic demonstration of some kind. Of course, we all know what happened. They call it an insurrection, an armed insurrection. And his videos are going to show that it was none of the above. There was no arms involved. It wasn't an insurrection. It was all staged, and nothing was real. And he'll show it right on camera. And I can hardly wait to see that. Anyway, you get the idea. Oh, down here is John B. Wells. He's the host of the Caravan to Midnight show. Everybody listens to him, and so forth. All of these speakers are really terrific people. They've taken the red pill themselves, and now they want to share it with the rest of the world. So I urge you to come. If you can't come, of course, to the event, be sure to sign up for the live stream. It's very, very expensive. Inexpensive. Today's my day for Freudian slips, I guess. No, it's not. It's not expensive at all. It's very inexpensive, and you'll be amazed. It's lower than any other conference I'm aware of. But we want you to come, because this is sort of an event where people come together, meet face to face, and touch each other, and get together and have coffee and make
do
alliances.
What humans are supposed to do.
Yeah, it's what humans are supposed to do. And not only that, get together and do alliances and organize a counterattack against what's being thrown at us. So there you have it.
Absolutely.
It's redpillexpo.org.
All right, Ed. Thank you very much for popping that. I'll put the links in. This was a marathon. I think we planned 1 hour, but we've done 2 hours. So you've got to run.
Well, we got into that crypto thing, and I'm glad we did. So I think I'm going to learn some more. So
absolutely.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Edward. You look after yourself, my friend. We'll chat soon.
All right. Bye-bye.